this episode of Soul Space Personalised. This is one episode out of a 7-part series that will be brought to you throughout February of 2023. Thank you to my guests, Rebecca Rose, Daryl, James, and Tony Rodriguez for being a part of this. The purpose or intention of bringing this to you is bringing to highlight some of the harder topics, some of the darker aspects of our world, so that we can bring a greater awareness and light to it. And not only that, but to share ways that we can all heal as individuals and heal as a collective, so that we can move into a more brighter, more liberated world with better understanding, more peace and harmony. So thank you for being here and watching this series. I hope that you get something out of it. Hello everyone, welcome. It's Alisha Brasher here at Cosmic Gateway, and I'm very excited to present and have a special guest with me today. So for this month, we're going to be going through different facets of the Secret Space program. And what I want to sort of demonstrate or show or showcase in these series is looking at the different components and breaking it down in terms of the space aspect, the soul, the spirit, and also the personalization of the humanness, the human journey. So I have been watching Daryl James for quite some time, and I've been so mesmerized by his testimony, his experiences, and the information that he shares. I think he has a wealth of knowledge, and I'm so incredibly grateful to have you here with me today. So welcome, Daryl. Thank you for being here.
Of course, thank you. Thank you.
So I guess for those who aren't familiar with your story, I'm sure that there'll be some people watching who may be familiar with you and others that aren't. I thought maybe we start from the beginning and maybe if we can start at a place of how you got involved, like where did that begin for you, and try and, I know it's hard to, kind of go in linear, but if we can start from the beginning, and where was the introduction for you? What was happening in your life?
Well, for me, I just got back from Iraq, and I was going into a new command, and I got into JMF, Joint Maritime Force, RAF, Royal Air Force, St. Maugen in Newquay, England. And I actually went into the command because of COLA, they call it, cost of living allowance, because the British pound was worth more than the twice as much as the dollar at the time. So that was really my only motivation, just to make more money to go to England. And I was only there probably a day or two, and they wanted me to escort some civilian workers from Siemens into the underground base. There was an underground base there, and I only had a secret clearance, so I thought it was strange that they wanted me to escort somebody. And I walked into the quarterdeck, which is like the lobby of the base, which is, you check into a new command there. If you're going to go on leave, on vacation, you check out there, you check in there. And there was a sliding glass door, and the Siemens guys were in front of me. And we came to a metal detector, and the one guy said, "I'm not going through that bloody thing." So I thought I didn't want to go through it either. So I went to walk around like they did. And it was just like a metal detector you'd see at an airport. It was just like that, it came down. And there was actually a little ramp on the ground with like the black and yellow striped tape, so you wouldn't trip over the little ramp on the ground. And so they didn't go through, and I was about to walk around it as well. But then there was this British guy with a rifle over his head behind the stainless steel table with a beret, a green beret, and he said, "No, you walk through." So I thought it was just, a metal detector, so I just walked through. That happened. I had them, they watched the pump. I watched them fix the pump, and I actually had somebody else guiding me, taking me, who had a top secret clearance. So like they didn't even really need me. So the whole thing was really suspicious to begin with. They only had a secret clearance, and I had to be escorted by a guy with top secret clearance just to take him to the pump. So, yeah, that happened. And then I had they call it balls to 4, which is like 0000 a.m. to like 4 in the morning watch at the quarterdeck. And I saw the Satanist Mike Latino there, and he had his eyebrows curled up like horns. And I saw him on Oprah when I was a kid, and that's the only reason I recognized him. And he just said, "How you doing?" And I said, "Hi." And then I just went on another round to walk around the base, and that's all I saw him. But I saw him looking at papers, so maybe I think maybe he was trying to, like, he saw my scores or something from walking through this machine, and maybe he was just trying to see me like in person or something like that. I don't really know. But then I had another Balls to Four watch on another Friday. So I had, you know, Balls to Four on a Friday, then another Balls to Four on a Friday, which isn't really common. And I was just sitting down, and the first class petty officer of the watch said, "What do you think about that?" And he pointed at the computer monitor, and it looked like just a picture of like a little stereotypical gray. It was a black and white picture, but it was actually a camera in a room. And next to that sliding glass door, there was like this big window that was like 6 inches to the top, 6 inches to the bottom. And yeah, he, can you hear my dog?
Yeah, it's all good. I got 4 here, so I'll go and see.
I left the back door open, so he's outside barking. Yeah, so yeah, there was this window, 6 inches at the top, 6 inches at the bottom, and there was, and he said, "Look," and he asked me what I thought about the thing on the screen, and he said, "Look," and there was this little light brown, like gray kind of, they call it a drone, and it was just standing there behind this window, and he said, "Do you mind if it comes in here?" And I said, "Do you mind if I look at it?" It said, "I don't mind," but like in my head. And then it walked out, and that same guard was behind him, and it had a little like pistol in its hand. It looked like brushed metal. And I kept on saying gun. I thought it was a gun, and I stood up and I said gun. And then they both said it's not a gun. So then I sat back down. I thought maybe it was a syringe or something like from Star Trek. They're gonna inject me with something or something. But it was actually just like a little drill, like a little drill gun. And it took apart this Dell computer that was on the ground next to me really fast, extremely fast. Didn't have to guide the bit in or anything like that. It just boom, boom, boom every time. It hit the nail. It hit the screw every time on the head. And it was catching all the screws with the other hand the whole time. It was just catching every one. And then it slid it off, put it down, took out 2 gigs of RAM, and then it reached up to the table. It was short, grabbed 2 more gigs of RAM, popped them in, and slid it back down. It was able to like flick its wrist and just reset the screws every time, like with, you know, machine-like accuracy. And let me look at it for a while, and I kind of looked this way, that way, and it was moving its head for me so I could get a good look at it. It was moving its arms around for me, its hands around for me so I could get a good look at that. And then I got kind of bored with it and I walked away. And then the first class petty officer of the watch, he said, "What do you think about that?" And I said, "It's, you know, pretty weird." And he said, "Do you think you could work around something like that?" And I think it was maybe probably a test to see if I would run away or attack it or what, just to see how I would interact with this thing. And yeah, so then I had a Monday watch.
Ask you a question there?
Sure, of course.
What was going on in your mind having that experience? Like, was it a bit surreal? Was it like, did you feel like—
I was very scared. I was very scared. It was very scary. I didn't like, it was almost like it almost seemed more like an unknown animal to me, like something, you know, a creature. It almost seemed like I was looking at this animal that I've never seen before in the wild. And then I remember when the guy was asking me these questions later on, I was nauseous, you know, my knees were shaking. I had that really bad, like after an adrenaline dump kind of feeling where you're very weak and you can barely stand. So yeah, it really scared me. Like I did want to run when I saw it. I mean, it was frightening.
Do you think that the reaction, sorry with my questioning, but do you think with the reaction, like that was just a shock kind of response? Or do you think that there was like an energy that was also inhabiting that that being that kind of created that reaction? Like, sorry, I didn't question that very well, but do you think it was just like your human response to it, or do you think that there was an energy that was foreign to you that was creating some sort of a reaction in your body.
Well, that's the thing. It is, I think what really freaked me out is it moved very robotic-like and darty. It kind of like darted. It looked like a toy or something, kind of like wobbled like that. It came really quick right at you, and it was very fast. And then it just stopped motionless once it stopped in front of you, and it didn't breathe. It didn't move. It was like looking at a refrigerator. And I remember that feeling too, where it didn't seem like anything was there. So it didn't seem like it really had a consciousness like we do or something like that. It was just kind of looking at this organic machines. It was what it felt like, and maybe that's what made it seem even more frightening. It was even more strange in that sense. But yeah, and then he started telling me all these things about. He said I was the second smartest guy on base, and I said, "How do you know that?" And he said, "That machine you walk through." And then he told me it could detect clots, it could detect whether you drank or smoked, or it could detect all these things just by walking through it for a split second.
Yeah.
And he told me I was the second smartest guy on base, and I found out later that the executive officer, the XO, who I got to know in the program, he was the smartest on base, but he was genetically augmented in the womb. He later on told me that he was from the year 2580, and he had to go back in time to change the timelines and things like that. So he was actually kind of like created for this mission that he was on. And
do you have any awareness of the process of how he was augmented in the womb, or what beings were involved in that? You may not know the answer to that. I'm just curious.
Well, as far as I remember, with having children and stuff like that while I was in the program, what it is there's the, like the nanotech, the picotech, things like that. It's already in the mother's body, and as the cells are splitting, the tech will alter the cell's DNA and makes them, as strong as they can be, smart as they can be, fast as they can be, things like that. It gives them like the best opportunity for survival, basically, in life. But then after it does it like the first few hundred times, the DNA just starts replicating it itself. And so then the tech just kind of lets go and just lets it grow naturally after that. But it only does it like the first few hundred times. It alters the DNA of the person as their cells just multiplying. And then after I don't know, about the 300th time, the cells just start doing it, replicating on their own with the different augments and alterations that were done to them. And it just happens naturally. But yeah, and then he started asking me if I had any hobbies, if I had any tattoos. And I told him I used to play classical guitar. And then I said, and then he said, "Do you have any tattoos?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Good, the Germans don't like tattoos." I said, "Germans?" And I said, "What do you mean Germans?" And he goes, "Well, there's Germans up there." He's like, "On the moon and further." And he said, I said, like, "You mean Germans from today?" And he's like, "No." Like, he said, like, from 30s and 40s mostly. He's like, "Some of them are from today," but he's like, "Mostly from the 30s and 40s." And I really didn't know what he was talking about. And as I said, my whole concept of reality was kind of falling around me, and I was really trying to just figure out what was happening. And he was asking me all this stuff, and I remember I almost got angry with him, and I was like, we should just start telling people about, like, why doesn't anybody know about this stuff? Like, that was my first reaction. Why doesn't anybody know? And he said something like, "You need to calm down." He's like, "Why don't you go for a walk?" But yeah, he was just, and he said, "You'll be an officer with your scores." And and he said, "You'll have plenty of time to practice, your instruments and things like that. So you'll just be able to do it then." And and so that happened. And then I talked to the executive officer. He came to the garage on Monday, and he asked to see me, and I went on a walk with him. And he said, "Petty Officer James, have you ever heard of Project Solar Warden?" And I said, "No, sir." And he said, well, have you ever heard of the United States Navy Secret Space Program? And I said, no, but I think I can figure that out. And he said, he talked about Gary McGinnon, which was like a Scottish man who hacked into NASA. This was in 2000. I was talking to him in 2003, and he hacked in 2001. So it was still like a kind of a current event. It was in, you know, the UK area. And he got all this information about off-world officers and social security numbers and cigar-shaped craft over the moon, things like that. And he said it's all real. And he told me that the only reason that the U.S. government didn't extradite him to prosecute him is because he would have been able to call witnesses, and the whole program just would have been blown apart. Like the cover would have been blown, so they just dropped it. And yeah, he said I would be the captain of a 4-kilometer-long starship. He said with my scores, and it was just really mind-blowing. And I didn't know where the whole time. I thought he was messing with me. I really didn't know what to think of this. And I thought about it, and I remember one thing I said was, you know, because 20 years is a long time. I said, will I be able to have children? And he said, yes, with your scores, you'll be expected to have children. And I said, well, what will happen to my children? And he said, they'll be taken care of. And I said, will I ever be able to see him again? And he said, no. And I said, well, that sounds sad. And he said, like, you know, and then he started calling me Mr. James. He said, Mr. James, I promise you, you won't remember anything. He told me about, you know, 20 year and back. He told me about, you'll go back and, you know, you'll do your 20 years. You go back in time 20 years. You'll the age regress 20 years. And you'll have the last 20 years of your memory wiped. And you'll just wake up in bed like nothing happened. And I'd like to talk about something real quick where it's part of that. I was hanging out with this English guy. We were drinking or something like that. And he really liked NFL stuff. He had like a American football helmets, jerseys all over his walls. And I think we were watching a movie or something like that. And he said, he just stopped all of a sudden. He said, hey, look at that. And he looked out the window and he goes, look at that. And I saw, like, it looked like a body being carried by a man with like a black hooded sweatshirt on with like black pants, black sneakers even. And he had like, it looked like one of those gray like wool military blankets, had a body rolled in it, and he had the body over his shoulder. And I said, and I thought like, and I had no, this was in the, like after I volunteered the program, and I had no memory of any of this stuff at the time. And I remember I said, should we help him? Because I thought like maybe it was just like a guy carrying around a corpse or something. That's what it looked like, with a black hoodie on. And the Englishman looked at me and he said, no, it's too late for him. He said, we can't help him. It's too late. So it was like, that was a guy that volunteered for the 20 year and back. And that's like how they bring you back to your room. They like wrap you up in a blanket and take you back at like 2 in the morning when most people are asleep. We were up pretty late when we saw it. Yeah. So yeah, I volunteered for the program. And well, I thought like, if I'm going to do this, I'll do it for something. And my father had a heart attack when I was 19, and I joined the military at 21. I was 24 now, going on 25. And actually, no, wait, what was I? I was 25. I was 25 then. And yeah, and I said that machine I walked through, it told you that if you had clots and whether or not you drank or smoked and all that stuff. I said, why isn't technology like that, you know, available to the public? And he said, well, we can't do things like that because of population control and all these other things. And I said, well, there has to be like a, you know, like a faction or a side that wants to bring this to the public. And he said, you mean like a traitor? And I said, no, sir, nothing like that. And he said, well, there is. And I said, well, if you can get me on that side, I'll do it. So shook his hand, saluted him. He started walking away, and he said, one more thing, Petty Officer James, or he's calling me Mr. James now, like an officer would to another officer. And he said, you're going to be escorted by a reptile, and he's big. And I really didn't know what he was talking about. And so then I had another Friday watch. And I remember guys were telling me about these things on base to kind of get me like acclimatized, I guess you would say, to the situation. They were, when we were playing video games like Halo and stuff, they would bring up how there's reptiles and elongated skulls and grays that live in these underground bases and stuff like that. And yeah, it was just, I had another, ball at the forewatch, and I came in, and the guy said, sit down. He's the same first class petty officer that told me to sit down, that they showed me everything on the computer when I walked through what I thought was a metal detector. And yeah, and it was just behind that same window where there was 4 inches in the bottom, 4 inches top. There was this big, like, brown reptile that had, like, its mouth went straight across it up, and it had, like, alligator eyes, and it had, like, ridges going across, almost like mohawks.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very dark brown. And it was very big, and it was wearing one of those, like, blue skin-tight suits.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably about 9.5 feet tall. I had to, like, kind of cower, like, bend down in the room to be able to stand in that room. So I was like, it freaked me out, but eventually I just went with it. And eventually we got to it looked like a gas chamber. It had like the watertight door. And when we walked up like this catwalk, 3 steps, and just walked into like this, one of those, like you see on ships, those oval kind of doors with a watertight door. Mm-hmm. And there was like a chair that had holes on it and straps. So I thought it was like a gas chamber chair or something. I didn't know what it was. I thought it was like trying to kill me. And nobody told me anything. And I didn't know what was happening. But I remember, like I said, the guys were like, it seemed like they were trying to acclimatize me or something. And I was in the TV room one time. This is before I joined the program. And it was like the room across from the TV room. The door was open, and this kid was talking. He was saying, you're going to be taken into a room. And there's going to be a chair. You'll be strapped in. It's called a density chamber chair. And it's because most of the ETs we deal with are 5th density. And they're much too strong. They're much too fast. We wouldn't be able to keep up with them. They're much too intelligent. He said you'll become stronger, faster. Your IQ will go up 200 points, and you'll become more of a collective. And so I tried to like fight. I tried to run away, and it grabbed me and it threw me in. And I remember it leaned in and it said something like, "Don't make me hit you again," because it hit me one time and I blacked out. And I came to and I had straps were on. And when he did that, I jammed my thumb in its eye. It got right in my face. I thought it was gonna bite me or something. I don't know. And so anyways, it leaned against my chest until it like collapsed my chest, pushed against my heart. I blacked out. And I came to and all the straps were in, and he closed the door. And then I felt almost like out of body experience in the sense of it was like weightlessness kind of feeling, like cold, and then it was just like peace. And but I had no idea what it was. And then I came to and I had like amnesia. I was very weak. And I saw the reptile's back was towards me, but it was kind of doing this, like it was talking. And it had this guy in front of him. He was doing the same thing, and he looked really like pitiful, like he felt bad for it. And but he was wearing a Gestapo uniform, like a German Gestapo uniform. His hair was like slicked back. He was blonde, and he had like an undercut. And he was wearing like a black leather trench coat. It looked like. And I slid down the chair, and I remember one of the footrests hit me in the back. And I said something like, "Can I go to bed now?" Because I was just exhausted, and I fell on my hands and knees. I just fell on all fours, and I remember the boots coming in front of my peripheral, because my vision, because I was looking down at the ground. And he said, "I should have you executed for what you did to my man. You hear me?" And I passed out. Then I remember being carried by the reptile like a duffel bag just under its arm. And I was like, I said something like I said, "Hey, put me down. I have to pee." Because he was like right on my bladder, like I was like laying right on my, and I was like, I said something like, "I'm gonna pee on you," you know what I mean? I had to go to the bathroom, and I just passed out. I was exhausted. And then I found out later it was a looking glass portal we walked through. I saw like a bright light, and kind of like stepping through the looking glass. It's kind of like a thing where you could see the future with a 94% accuracy. Robert told me this later on. And or you can go into the past. So you could just observe like you're looking at a looking glass, or you could step through it, and then and I remember I asked him when he was telling me this stuff, I was like, "So what does it look like? Somebody just appears out of nowhere? Like if you were in like the 40s and you wanted to go through a looking glass portal?" And he goes, "Yeah, pretty much. It just looked like the person would just appear out of nowhere." So yeah, it was just a portal they would walk through. And I remember also Robert told me that if I wasn't 5th density, I wouldn't be able to go through that portal, because 3rd density beings can't go through portals, he said. And he told me about the Babylonian arch that they had in the courtyard of the Vatican. He said that's a real portal, but since we're only third density, we can't see them and we can't go through them. So you have to be fifth density just to use, or fourth or fifth density just to use portals. And yeah, he set me down like on a medical table, like a medical bed. It was just a regular old bed. And I remember a woman started putting things on me, like stickers, heart monitor stuff. And I remember the reptile said he has to urinate, and I heard like one long tear, and she put a catheter in me. So it was just really like basic things, you know what I mean? It wasn't like what you'd think as far as really high tech and things like that. Yeah. He was just doing basic things. And I passed out, came to the next day, and I was all by myself in this white room. And she came back in, and later on I found out it was a woman I knew on base named April. So I guess she would join the program too. She was IT, but she was a nurse here. On the base, she was like computer technician, but here she was a nurse on the moon. And so yeah, she was doing all these things. She was doing basic tests at first, like put my fingers between yours, and grip test, reflex test, and then eventually she got like a smart glass pad, which is like those plexiglass rectangular pads where the smartphone is based off of them. And she started like being able to, she could pull images out of it and show like a humanoid, kind of spin it around, and then she could put her hand into it and like magnify the brain, the heart, things like that. And so she was just giving me like another physical. And I remember she was going to leave for the day, and I said, wait, don't leave me. I was like, I don't know anyone, and I don't want you to leave me, is what I basically said to her. Like, I don't know anybody here, please don't leave me. So she took my hand and she took me out of this room, and I was kind of like in a courtyard of a condominium is what it looked like. And I remember I looked behind me, and there was like a train system kind of running behind us. And there was like men going towards the train. And I think it was probably the mines. It was probably mine workers, like leaving for work. Because later on I got put in the mines, and they were wearing like light gray jumpsuits, is what it looked like. And there were these 4 lifts, like square lifts that went up. But there was no railings around the lift. So she took my hand and we walked up to this lift, and it just went straight up, and then it went right to her room. She was like on the 5th floor. I think it was only about 5 floors high. She went to the 5th floor, and I remember looking straight up. That was something else. And there was just like this giant like square light. It was just like but it wasn't a light. It was just like it was like a, I don't know what you would say, like a, I don't know. It was just like a ceiling that was lit. Yeah. That's what I'm trying to say. It was just like a lit ceiling. And yeah, I took her to a room, and I remember there was a woman with a baby standing on one of the walkways on the top floor, and there was no railings or anything like that. And I said, like, aren't you afraid you're gonna fall off? She said, no, you can't. She just stepped right off. And she said, yeah, there's a field that goes all the way to the end of the other side of the other side of the wall. And she said the kids play on it, but they're not supposed to. So there, every level had like this invisible like field, so you couldn't actually fall off. And we went to a room, and there was this very Spartan, just had like a desk, a table, coffee table, like a bar, like 4 bar stools, like a kitchen area, bedroom, bathroom, couch. It was just like that. She took my hand. We went to the bedroom. We started to kiss, and then she said, wait. She said, what's your name? And I thought about it, and I said, I don't know. And she said, come on. She said, come on, think about it. Everybody remembers their name. I thought about it, and I said, Daryl. And then we got together after that. We had sex. She became almost like my girlfriend while I was there on the underground base. In the moon. But then she was laying on my chest, and this is how it kind of felt for me. And I just like leaned my head against the headboard, and I just closed my eyes, and I woke up, and I was back in England. It was really weird. I didn't know what was happening. And something else was strange. I don't know if I ever said this, but it was like when I woke up, the chair that was for my desk that I usually had pushed under my desk was like right here by the bed, like facing me. And my uniform was laid really like neatly on it, like my pants first, and then my shirt, and then my tie, and then my shoes were underneath it, like facing me, underneath the chair, facing me. And I still had my socks on and my shirt on. And I really don't do that. Like I never sleep with my socks on. And I was just like, what? I was really weird. Like I was like, what's happening to me? And I have like images, these weird images of like being in pain and then being carried. And like I said, I think that's me being carried and how I was very real, like oh, thank God I got out of there. I remember I had that feeling, and I could breathe the cool air again. I was in like this cave that was very hot air and very hot, humid, and I remember seeing like blonde-haired, blue-eyed people with like blue suits and things like that. It was just these flashes came, and then I just woke up. But it was almost like I said, I just closed my eyes for 10 seconds, and I came to. And I looked in a full body mirror, and I was like really toned. I was like in really good shape, and I didn't know why I was in such good shape. And I had clay on the tops of my feet, and I didn't know why like tops of my feet were dirty. I remember I looked at the bottoms, and the bottoms were clean, but the tops were dirty. And I ran my hand through my hair because I was stressed out, and I had like burnt stubble in my hair. Then I did it on my chest. I had burnt stubble, and then, I mean, yeah, that's how it started out for me. Is there any questions
Yeah,
like, that's the beginning, I guess. Yeah.
So you kind of went in, and then you had that memory, and then you woke up. Do you feel like you were still involved in the programs at that point, or was that the placing you back, or is it a bit hard to tell?
Well, that was placing me back, but I remember Robert, I talked to him before I got out of the Navy, and he just came clean to me and told me everything. And he had a point of view of, you're still there.
Yeah.
Like there's like kind of like two of you, like in two different areas of space, but you're sharing the same consciousness. It's like there could be only one soul at a time, or one consciousness at a time. But consciousness are like, they're kind of omnipresent. They can be at more places at once.
Yeah.
So he was like saying, like, he was telling me things, you're going to have your memories come back to you in real time, is what he said. So as I make like new memories in this other life, the younger me, I guess you would say, or the one in the secret space program still, I experience these memories, here. Yeah. So it's not like I can really tell my future. I can remember the very beginning, and I can remember the very end right away. Like that was part of like what I remembered when I first woke up. But the stuff in between was kind of foggy. It's like I really didn't know anything in between.
That's how I've always understood it, even though it's like they take you and then potentially clone or whatever, and then there's the consciousness that goes into the other aspects, whether it's multidimensionally or through the cloning process. But I believe that when we're still here on Earth, there's a portion of our consciousness that's still active or operating through those programs, and that's the part that I'm really curious about in terms of these energetic overlays that occur, and it's hard to get your head around initially, or especially if you don't have those experiences. But do you still have, I guess one of my questions is, like, in real time now, do you have impressions or visions or kind of awarenesses of what the other aspects of you are doing real time?
Yeah, but it's almost like, it's just like life in the sense that, you don't create new memories every day. It's only like the certain things that really stand out to you.
Yeah. And
you create these memories. Maybe I might get a new one once a week, or maybe I might not get one for 6 months. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like that. It's like, you don't remember every single day of your life. It's these little individual events that happen to you that really stand out that you remember.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do they come through to you? Like, is it like you wake up in the morning and you're having like an awareness early in the morning, or is it like, have you noticed any particular anomaly, I guess, of how those memories or the what I call the energetic bleed through comes through to you? Like, is there something that you do, or is there no sort of correlation to how that happens?
For me, it's almost like I wake up and it's almost like I feel like I had a dream, but I really can't place the dream. And then I'll be doing things like, I'll be doing my morning routine where I'll be making food in the morning or coffee. And then a big part of it is walking my dog, because I always listen to music, and I listen to music a lot in the program. So it's weird. It's kind of like correlates to, I'm listening to music, and then, oh yeah, this is happening, and that happened. Oh yeah, and then I forgot about, and it's kind of like that. It comes in like that. It's maybe somebody says an expression, you know what I mean? It's like if somebody says an expression to me, or I say an expression, I was like, oh yeah, I said that on the ship, and then all of a sudden this flood of memory comes back.
Yeah.
And so it's something almost like I don't know. Like I said, it's almost like you wake up from a dream and you can't really place it, and then it just kind of avalanches into more and more throughout the day.
Yeah.
Sense.
Do you see it? Do you feel it? Do you sense it or know it? Or is it a combination?
It's a combination. Like I can remember, like, you know, maybe talking to someone and getting a reaction from them, getting them to laugh, and I remember that. I remember just that it was maybe I said something funny and I got people cracking up and something like that, or maybe it was just I was almost killed or something like that, and then that kind of comes back to me. But you know, I don't know. It's really difficult. You know, it's one of those things. Kind of like even the people that I knew on the ship. It's like it's more like a feeling of you have the feelings of these people, but you really can't remember them in the sense of their faces, their names, things like that. It's still difficult for me to place faces and names and things like that. But I think that's just part of the mind wipe process. But it's just more like scenario situations. You know what I mean? I really can't place an individual thing I did.
Yeah. Do you find that what would be the most prominent memories that come back? Are they the happy ones? Are they the traumatic ones? Are they just more of your mundane people is it very people based around interactions?
Well, I mean, just like life, it's sad to say, but it's probably the more traumatic ones. You know, that's an evolutionary thing. You don't want traumatic things to happen to you again, so you remember the more traumatic things in life, it seems like. But I mean, I remember the happy ones as well. But what really I told Robert when he was talking to me in the office, one of the first, I said, I remember having my back broken, and then the reptiles ate my legs. And he said they did that so you wouldn't go into shock. He said they broke your spine first because they were just trying to scare you. The shock is still dangerous, even with ET tech. Like going into shock one too many times, especially. You can usually survive one time going to a med bed or a healing tank, but if they do it to you again and again, usually by the third time you don't snap out of it. You just kind of go into a coma almost. It doesn't matter what they do to you; it's like you don't react. I've seen that happen to other people before. So yeah, I remember him saying that, like they did that to you so you wouldn't go into shock. And shock is still dangerous. Yeah.
That's so fun. Can we talk a little bit about, I'd like for people to try and grasp a little bit about two aspects. I think it's really hard for people to get their head around. I think you have a great way of articulating and explaining. I want to talk about the cloning process and also about the healing technologies like the med beds and the tanks. So I mean, maybe we'll start with the cloning process first, just so that people can try and get their head around like how these things can happen, like having your back broken and things like that, and then how you come back into form.
Yeah, the clone, I remember the main clone event I remember was, I'm not really sure, they had like tanks where they could make clones. Tanks that looked almost similar to kind of med beds, but they were standing straight up. Mm-hmm. And the clone would just be like kind of like leaning back, standing in this like tube, almost like a med bed. Instead of it being laying down, it was like standing up.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Those tanks that stand up, have you ever come across or seen one that is in like a almost like an electric blue color, like a bit similar to the background?
Well, the medical area, which would have something like that, does have a kind of light blue theme. There's like these, I remember it just, when you just go to a medical area, and it doesn't matter if it's a reptile or like Pleiadian or any of that stuff, they call it universal ET tech. It kind of all has a similarity to it. And it's almost like that color and that glow of blue maybe itself is like a soothing, healing color. But yeah, I remember like, especially if you're going to like the med bed area, there would be like these kind of like lights like that, but they would just go all around the wall, and they would be like a glowing like blue. And then like the trim of the med bed on the outside would have like this glowing blue kind of trim on it. It was like metal, but it had like this blue trim. And it's almost like the it was almost like light therapy, it seemed like. It was almost
like a UV light kind of as a something to compare it to that we would know or understand. Yeah. Like those solarium beds, you know, back in like the early 2000s, where the tanning beds, and there would be that bright UV light. I think they were more white, not blue, but it's kind of reminds me of that a little bit. Yeah.
But yeah, I remember, well, as far as like clones, which is kind of weird and freaky, I remember when Robert was talking to me before I left the Navy, and he said, you were killed the third day you're on Mars. He told me that. I remember being overrun by reptiles, and I remember just his jaws coming down like on my face, and everything went black. And I said, I'm a clone, and he said, yes. And I said, well, and he's the reason he was talking to me so I wouldn't commit suicide. He told me that, you know, people that have memories of 20 years back usually commit suicide within the first 6 months. And I kind of came to like a situation where I was, you know, what's the point? What does it matter? Like I'm dead. I'm just a clone. This isn't even me. I just have memories of this guy that once existed. So what's the point of any of it? And he said they were able to salvage your consciousness, is what he told me. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he shrugged his shoulders, and he said, your soul, if that makes you feel any better. He's like, the part that makes you, you. He's like, they were able to salvage that, put it into an exact replica of your body in every way. And it's you. He kept on saying, Daryl, it's you. Don't panic. Because I was almost having like a panic attack. And I remember I said, like, what you mean, like the, you know, the Daryl my mother gave birth to, his bones are rotting somewhere on Mars. He said, yes. So that's like a weird clone kind of story, you know. But I remember like, you know, I remember this coming to, and I was outside one of those tanks, and it was like this glass window, and it opened up, and a German woman. The women were usually like the nurses and stuff like that. The military calls them off-world Germans, and it was like a German woman was basically giving me a physical to make sure everything was all right. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a clone. Like he told me that. He said, yeah, you're a clone. He's like, but you know, they're able to salvage your consciousness, and everything that makes you, you is there. And I remember he said, it's not good for you. I remember he said that in the sense that maybe it takes a piece away from you. He really didn't go into a thing. Clinical death, going into a clone, even things like not med beds, but healing tanks. Healing tanks aren't really good for you. They're only meant for really bad injuries, like being blown in half, like an absolute emergency. Because they almost like kind of liquefy you and then put you back together. Like, because all the tech floats down to the bottom of the tank. All the tech leaves your body, all the implants they put into you. So it's almost like it liquefies you and kind of puts you back. So it's really not that good to go into a med bed. I mean, med beds are fine. He told me that too. He said med beds you can go into every day and there's no adverse effects. But he said, yeah, healing tanks, clinical death, you know, being cloned, you know, it can kind of, I guess it does psychological damage to you after a while if you do it too many times. Just like he told me about age regression. He said, if they can only age regress you 40 years. They do it 20 years, and then they say, would you like to do another 40 at the end of your first 20 years? And so they can only do 40 years, but then after they can do more, but it could do psychological damage, basically drive you mad, like make you insane. I remember I asked him, he told me he was like around 500 years old. He couldn't really pinpoint it, and he had been age regressed 17 or 18 times for this mission. And I said, how often do you have a psyche eval, which is a psychological evaluation in the military? And he said every 2 weeks. Like he didn't skip a beat. It was like routine for him that he had to go through like a psychological evaluation every 2 weeks. But yeah, so that's the clones. Then you said med beds and healing tanks. Like I said, med beds are fine. Med beds will do things like they'll make the softer parts of you. They can manipulate that. But even like even your bones, they can bring back bone density. They can bring back teeth. They can bring back pretty much anything limbs, eyes, brain. If you have brain damage, that's fine. But I mean, if you have the top of your head taken off, that's not a good thing. And but
little bit
yeah,
scenario.
the head is the soul, as they say. It's just it's not, your consciousness is kind of there. And I remember like going into a healing tank one time because I had like the top right part of my chest is blown off, and I went to feel around the tank, and I felt like smooth, like a round wall, and I went to look up, and it really hurt. So I like reached around, and I felt like a cable connected into like right on my neck, like my brainstem, and it sends like electrical impulses to your brain. So even if you're clinically dead, your consciousness will stay there. It won't, your consciousness won't leave the body. It will stay. So yeah, I remember that about healing tanks. And like I said, whenever they did, the reptiles did eat my legs like that and break my back. I remember a German picked me up, and he was like a friend of mine, and he just kind of laid me into a healing tank, but almost like a jacuzzi, where I had like my arms kind of hanging out, and I was just at the top of it. So only like up to my chest, I was really submerged in it, and I just had to stay in there for, I don't know, not very long at all. And yeah, and that's something else they do. They use these technology for vicious things as well. I don't know if you want to get to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to highlight every aspect, because in the process of doing that, we can understand the depths of the darkness to bring it to light. So feel free.
I remember there was a guy that I guess it was almost like a boot camp scenario, and the Germans he swung at one of the Germans, and there was 3 of them, and they just beat him. And they're genetically augmented of the womb, so they're much stronger than us. They're much stronger than us. And they started kicking him on the ground until he started to shake. So he started like to convulse. And they had us pick him up, and we just put him into a healing tank. Walked up this ladder and just dropped him in. And we just left him in there for just a couple minutes, and we pulled him back out and put him on the ground. He was coughing and everything, coughed all the fluid out. So they'll do things like that if they want to like punish you, because they could just use a med bed, but it would take longer. They want you to just be in there for like a minute and realize like what you did, and that's not a good thing you did. And Aquino did. Later on the story, I found out Aquino was like one of the guys on base told me they have some sort of machine that can pull the consciousness out of a person, but they can't be too young, like 3 or 4, because the body's mostly sedentary. It's almost used as a vehicle. It sits there most of the time. But they have to do it before puberty. So around 9 or 10 years old is probably when they do this. And they're able to pull the consciousness out of a body, out of a being. And then another being can kind of like project their consciousness into that body and use it almost like a puppet. Yeah. And that's what Mike Latino was. He was being puppeted. His body was just being puppeted by some sort of, it was a reptile that it was like black. It was like onyx black. It had really thick, lumpy scales, like all over, and it kind of had a snout, fangs, like snake eyes. It had a red hood on, a red cloak, and a red hood. And yeah, he told me he was worshipped in ancient Egypt at one time and things like that. He was like a god in ancient Egypt. He was very old. And yeah, so that's what Aquino was. And I remember Aquino's body like sitting there watching me being tortured, and it had a weird smile on it, almost like a kid waiting for his ice cream or something, like a really bizarre. So you can kind of tell like almost like the consciousness was taken out when it was young, but it was like there was nothing there. It was like a blank face just smiling. Like it was just like this unmanned craft. And I remember the guys, everybody on the base knew that I was tortured like this. It became like a gossip kind of thing. Not the guys I worked with in the garage, because I worked in the garage, all the guys in the underground base. I remember one of the guys came forward to me and said, yeah, like everybody knows. Like, everybody knows that this happened to you. Tino really messed you up. It does not make you mad. Like, this man did this to you, and yeah, nothing's going to happen to him.
Do you have any idea why you were targeted in that way and tortured? Like, was that just a thing for kicks, or was it a punishment, or was it to keep you in line? Or
I think it was the punishment for poking the reptile in the eye. That's a big no-no. But I also think, I remember him saying something like, I don't want to kill you, I just want to destroy your life. He said something like that to me. So it's reptiles, like, you know, it's not enough to just like kill you, like whatever, torture you slowly. They want to just try to ruin every aspect of your life. And that's, I don't know, they enjoy that. They like that. I remember I asked Robert even, like, why did they do these things? He just said they like it. And he was able to go back in time and alter my timeline because he was more of like an elder ET, an older ET. The older ETs, most fifth density beings can go forward in timelines and like read your future kind of thing, read their own future, read your future. But older ETs, the ones that are like thousands of years old, they can do things like they can go back in time and influence people to do things to you, or influence you to do things you usually wouldn't have done, kind of things like that. They influence your, then they can go through the timelines of people you know, people you've interacted with in your past, your parents, your friends, and they can mess up their lives too, you know? And I remember Robert was doing things where he was looking down my timeline. He could only go forward, he couldn't go back, but he could also branch off into different people I met. Say, oh yeah, this person does this in the future, and then this person does that in the future, you know? But so he was able to just not go down my timeline, but everybody I've met, he was able to branch off and kind of see what predict what their future was too as well.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. It makes so much sense to me. I was only having this conversation yesterday with a friend talking about how there's a lot of interference with people who have, like, you know, people like yourself who have a message to share that potentially could change things for humanity. And there's a lot of interference that comes through, a bit like when you're talking about Aquino and how that consciousness gets projected in. So it's like just an empty vessel, really, that that person is a vessel or a conduit for a darker entity that can be like influence into it to kind of make things chaotic and be quite traumatizing, to kind of put you off your path a little bit. Would you agree with that, or?
Definitely. I mean, yeah. Well, the thing is what my path would have been. It's just the whole kind of time travel thing. That's really confusing. Was I destined to, if Aquino was part of my past, then I must have been destined to do this in my future. So what would my past have been? I guess it always would have been that, you know? But something else you said, I remember one of the guys on base told me, everybody calls him Orlando, and he talked about stuff. Orlando. His name was Orlando, whatever you call him, Orlando Parisian from Star Wars. But I remember when I was being tortured, it was almost like he was trying to see if I remembered. I remember the XO was kind of, maybe the guys were wondering if I remembered, but I know Robert, he had people kind of following me who were posing as my friends, but just to see if I had any kind of memories and things like that, to make sure. And I remember he said he went to work and he saw Aquino sitting at the head of a table in the break room. I guess there was like a long window, you know, you could kind of look in. There was a long table with a TV at the end, and, you know, it was like a break room area. You could just look in. So if you wanted to try to find somebody who was on break, you could just see if they're in there by looking through this big window. And he said he just had this blank stare in his face, had both his hands on the table, was just looking straight ahead. And this was probably when I was being tortured. He probably sent the body back up. And he said he did a 12-hour shift and came back, and he looked in that window, and he said he saw Aquino sitting in that same exact spot with that same weird stare on his face, just staring at like a blank TV screen that wasn't even on for 12 hours straight. So this body was just sedentary for half a day, not even moving. And yeah, that's what he told me, that, yeah, that's why they can't do it too young, because the bones will become brittle and the body will become ill and die. So.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. I've seen that, and I'm so glad that you shared that, because in a few years ago, I had this sort of etheric encounter with a very similar snake being that presented and showed me images of it during ancient Egypt, and how it was like projecting through people that I was close to at the time. And I was actually seeing the superimposed image of them morphing into that and back. And that was a pretty terrifying encounter that I had, that I couldn't make any sense of. And when you were sharing that information, I think I saw in an interview, it really brought things home for me. And I was like, oh my goodness, yeah, like that makes sense. And since then, I've seen a lot of the, like, what I see is like more mini snake beings, like more astral beings that kind of distort people's perception. And it comes through behind the eyes, and you can kind of see it or feel it. But I kind of get the sense that that's being cleaned up a bit now. I think we're sort of moving into brighter times, but I'm really grateful that you were to bring that information forward. So him in his human form, do you think he has any awareness that that's happening to him?
No, that's the thing. It's almost like I said, it had this look like it was just like watching me being tortured. Like it was like this weird like kid like waiting for candy or something kind of look on his face. So it almost looked like he kind of got stuck whenever he got his consciousness taken out. That was it. Like that body, and it doesn't move and it doesn't do anything. It just has this weird glare smile on its face, almost like a 10-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old kid. And I mean, I've heard people say that it's impossible for there to be a being with no kind of, at least like collective consciousness in it. But I myself like have no idea. Like to me, it just seemed like nothing was there. Like he just had this blank, weird smile on his face, and nothing was really there. But yeah, same thing with the drones too. That feeling I got, like I was looking at an inanimate like refrigerator. Like I said, it really didn't look like there was anything there. Like I was just staring at a wall. But I've had people tell me that, you know, they share some sort of collective consciousness, but I'm not really familiar with that myself. I don't know, have any experience with that. So
yeah, fascinating. So let's go back to when you were on the base, then you got taken to the moon and the facility there, and then where did your next where were you stationed next from the moon?
Yeah, I did 3 months in the mines of the moon, and then I did 2 years in the Dark Fleet. And how I got into the Dark Fleet was Robert was there, the XO. He showed up like when I was working in the mines on the moon. And he started talking to a German officer. Then the German officer waved some sort of device or something in front of me. I guess saw my scores. And then he started yelling at the guy that got me there to begin with. The one he was the first class petty officer, that German that I first saw, that said I should have you killed for what you did to my man with the reptile. They had a lot of off-world Germans. That's what the military called them. And they had like and they were all like spies almost, you know, like the lieutenant, the head doctor who was a lieutenant, he was an off-world German. The master chief of the base was the S3, who was a lieutenant. He was like fourth in command. He was an off-world German. He was on my ship in the Dark Fleet. I think he was the first officer that I became friends with. He seemed like he knew me one time. He was chewing me out one time for getting into trouble, and he kind of, it felt like I knew him. Felt like he knew me. He wore glasses, but they don't wear glasses, but they do little things here and there to kind of so they blend in more. I remember I asked Robert about that. I said, well, the master chief's fat, and this guy's skinny, and this guy wears glasses, and I don't remember any of that. They were all kind of big men. And like, you know, men look like they can bench like 350, 400 pounds, something like that. Pretty big guys. And I said that they manipulate the DNA or the tech in their body to raise and lower their metabolisms or unfocus their eyes and things like that. He said, yes. I said, why do they do that? And he said, well, we can't just have a bunch of Ubermen running around on base, can we? And I said, yeah, I guess so. So it was like a way to kind of conceal them. They would make some of them a little fat, some of them skinny, things like that. And I remember they smoked cigarettes, a lot of them. 2 at least smoked cigarettes. And you know, it wouldn't really hurt them because they have the tech in their body. So, but yeah, then I did a couple years in the Dark Fleet. And when I first got there, I had a guitar waiting for me because I told that first class petty officer that I played classical guitar. And I started playing, I got really good at it. And then I just started playing in front of the Germans. They started to realize I play guitar. And they had like a bar on base. I'm not on base, but on the ship itself. And it was like a horseshoe bar, and the women sat at the bar, and the men sat at like round tables. And there was like 4 chairs at each round table. And yeah, so I got really good at that, and they started to like me. And then they basically, I got really good at my job too, because I was doing mostly things like I was going on Mars and I was getting mantises. They're really good at DNA. They're really good at DNA manipulation, and the reptiles went enough for DNA manipulation. And Yeah, I remember that same first officer, the German, who I said I think it was the S3, the lieutenant on base, and he would like look at me a lot of times before I left for Mars, and he would say things like, "You know, they're gonna eat you alive when you get back home for what you did." He said you might not want to come back. So I kind of had a mentality of like I risked my life a lot, and I would do just risky things, and I thought it would be better just to die there than be tortured to death. And it got me like a good reputation in the sense that I pretty much just about got every mantis they wanted, every mission they sent me on, I accomplished it. So the reptiles like congratulated me one time, and that really never happened. And so, and then there was a very high-ranking German that I had never seen before. He was like a guest on the ship, and then he said that I mean the reptiles told me that they would tell the others to take it easy on me when I go back, so because I was doing such a good job here, so I wouldn't be tortured as badly or whatever. I left, and then the Germans took me, and that high-ranking German, he said, they're lying to you. He said, like, when you go back to Earth, they're going to tear you apart. And he said, your only living relatives are your mother and father, or your mother and sister. We would like you to join the Dark Fleet full time. And I thought about it, and I said, are there horses on your world? And he said, I own 2 horses. And I said, that's nice. I like horses. I think they're beautiful. And I said, I want what you want. And he said, you want to be an officer? And I said, well, if I earn that, then yes. I said, I want a German citizenship. I said, I want to be able to have I would like to be able to own German or own land, have a German wife, have German children with her. And I remember he said, they say a lot, you know, you can be punished for that, for saying that. The Germans say that a lot. I said, yes, but you asked me what I wanted, and I'm telling you. So they talked about it, and yeah, I was granted like almost like a pass to go on their world. And I had been on their world before, but more like in a sense of, you know, in an auditorium. I remember this, I think it was like a basketball court when I was in the Dark Fleet, because they would take leave, you know, they would take leave. Their ship would go back, and they would see their families, and we would just have to be stuck like in this gymnasium on the base. And so this time I actually got to go out. And I remember I asked for money. I said, I asked the German I knew, I said, can I have some money? He said, what do you need money for? And I was like, well, if I meet a woman, I'd like to take her somewhere. And I'd like to buy clothes. I'd like to go swimming. And so he gave me like, I think it was like 500 francs, something like that. But it was like nice.
Yeah, what's the currency?
Yeah, they actually had money. Yeah.
Yeah.
They had money.
Like paper notes or
it seemed almost similar to like that gold foil money.
Ah, yeah, okay.
It was like it looked almost like gold, but in the shape of like bills and things like that. And yeah, I bought like a couple fitted suits. I bought a bathing suit, hats, shoes. It looked like the 40s there, the way that they dressed in their home world. It was like the men wore suits and fedoras, and the women wore dresses and pillbox hats, things like that. And
almost like trapped in time from like.
Yeah, it was like they were in the 40s still. It was weird. Even the kids, they wore like knickerbockers and like tweed hats and things like that. It was like, yeah. And I remember there was like a public transit system on their world where it was like these smaller branches would come in and hit this main kind of conveyor belt almost. It was like these small, they were slower and they would slowly speed up, and you'd hit the main one and you'd take off. And it would go about 60 miles an hour, and it was almost just like a moving sidewalk. And it was like a way of like public transit, so you can go from one end of town to the other really fast. Mm-hmm. And I remember this like holograms kind of showing up to tell you what, you know, landmark or street or whatever you were coming up on. It would just appear like while you were there, and there was no wind or anything like that. You were in like this tunnel, so it really didn't feel like you were moving. And it was very segregated in the sense of like men and women. It was like you really didn't see a lot of women on there. You saw boys and men like on that. But then the women, a lot of times they had children or were pregnant, and they would take almost like it wasn't a bus, but it was like a tram, it was like a trolley system, but very fast. It was like elderly people, women pregnant with babies, things like that, so they could sit down and everything. Because on this, whenever you hit the main one, you kind of like You had to catch yourself.
Yeah.
It's like you almost felt like you were gonna fall down. And yeah, and I remember that, and I went to the beach, went swimming, and I met a woman there. And I was only there. I don't think I was there more. This is one of the memories where I kind of have, I don't know what you would say, false memories, or I wonder sometimes, did I have a kid with her? I don't think so. I wasn't there that long. You know, I kind of have like, it's one of those things. It's one of the few times where I have a fuzziness about it.
Mm.
But yeah, like we got invited over to the first officer's house, and his wife made us dinner. And I remember he had two sons, and they sat like in a separate table, like a kid's table in the kitchen. So like I said, it's very old fashioned, like the kids instead of the table, they have like a kid's table. It was very good food. And that night I asked her to marry me, even though I only knew her for like, you know, a week or less. And she said yes. And then I had to go back, and we had to deploy again in the Dark Fleet. And yeah, I remember planning the wedding, and I remember the guys joking with me about, you know, the first officer. I let him be the best man, and the other guys were like, well, what about me? Things like that. I remember. Yeah, like the high-ranking officer was upset that I didn't make him the best man. You know, I've already promised to him. And then we got to a point where we went to a space station kind of thing. And that was almost kind of like a rectangular cube. And there were like windows. It was like this. It kind of went out like that, like that. There were these two windows, so you could see space and everything. And then the top was a window too, and you could see space. But behind us on the other two sides, there were levels. And it was anything from warring factions to talk about peace treaties and things like that, or even trade. Like ETs are really big on trade and stuff, trades from different worlds and things like that. And I just remember just so much stuff. It was just unbelievable. And I remember I only thought like, huh?
What sort of trading do they do primarily?
Well, I know from Earth and stuff like that. I remember that. That was like chocolate was big, cocoa. Yeah, chocolate was really big. Beer, especially like Heineken beer, and like children's clothing, because most of the beings out there are very small. So they're only like a foot or two tall, like most of the stuff that you would see. Yeah. So, and they like our fashion. They mostly just wear like robes, things like that. They really don't think about their clothing, and they like the things that we wear. So they like our clothes. So you would see like things like Gap Kids and Old Navy Kids, which are like companies, you know, in America. You would see things like that on the ships and Solar Warden. And yeah, but it would be for anything. Like they like maybe like a kind of alcohol from a different world, or maybe a kind of delicacy from another world, things like that. ETs are really into trade. They like that. And yeah, so the
sorry, I made you lose your train of thought. I have two questions going back. Did you end up getting married, or was it?
No. As far as I remember, no, I don't think I did. Just engaged.
Yeah.
Just engaged. Yeah. I don't remember actually being married. And it's kind of like the whole time you were in this program, you were like a slave. You know what I mean? It's something that like you figure out is slavery is really big with ETs. It's a sad thing, but it's a huge thing.
So they have control over you, basically.
Yeah. And we're wanted a lot of people from Earth, because our DNA, I think it's the most malleable in the universe, our DNA. So it can be spliced with pretty much anything. And you have the gray agenda and stuff like that, and the grays are making hybrids using human DNA and things like that. And there's like entire worlds of people from Earth that have never seen Earth, that are just, you know, children either born of these secret space programs and things like that, because they encourage you to have children, you know, because children are worth a lot. They're, you know, you can get a lot of technology for kids and things like that.
Can you talk? Can you elaborate?
Hmm?
Can you elaborate a little bit about the commodity of children?
Well, I remember in the Mines of the Moon, they had like brothels, and it was their only motivation to work. I remember that. As far as like, people from Earth and everything like that, and those kids, to even get on the Mines of the Moon, I remember Robert told me you have to have at least 110 IQ, unless you're there for punishment. If you're there for punishment, it doesn't matter. But if you volunteer, you have to have at least 110 IQ just to work in the Mines of the Moon. And your only motivation to work, is there's these brothels, and it's just like unlimited sex. And then a lot of times they'll take the kids and they put them in the underground bases, and then that's where you get like the adrenochrome and stuff like that. They put these kids in like cages, underground bases. He told me about that. They put them through the looking glass portal, and they electrify the cages, and that's what causes the adrenaline to surge. And then they pull them out of the cage. They electrocute them until they're unconscious, and they pull them out, strap them to a table, and they put like a needle in. He said at the base of the skull, like near the brainstem, and then they get the adrenochrome from that, and that's how they get it. And it's like a way to stay young. Plus the adrenaline, it gets you like a high, higher than anything else you believe. And he told me the withdrawal can kill you. And that's why you see a lot of these movie stars and stuff like that aging kind of insanely fast, like Madonna and stuff like that. But then you notice other ones wouldn't, like Cher and Tom Cruise and things like that. So I don't know. Yeah, he told me about this adrenochrome stuff. And
was that shocking to you to learn about that, to understand what was going on? Like how is your cognitive process around that?
Well, I mean, being dragged through the underground, there's caverns in the underground base. When I came back from the program, I remember being drugged, and I had a woman on my right and a man on my left. They were holding me and dragging me, and I was naked. And that's why I got the tops of my feet with clay on it. The tops of my feet were dirty. I was dragging on the clay in these underground caverns. And she said something like, "He's heavy. Let's take a break." And then he said, "All right." She dropped my one side, but he was still holding me. And then this little kid came scurrying up, and like, look like a dog kennel. Look like they had dog kennels kind of stacked up and like wide. And this little girl, it looked like a little girl came scurrying up. She was naked and pure white. Her hair was like matted. Her eyes were real big, like dilated big, like she'd never see the sun. She came scurrying up. She slammed the cage. And then the woman said, "Get the fuck back." She slammed the cage. She kind of went back. And then I remembering that. And then I was talking to Robert, and that was a memory, a very strong memory I still had. It was very shocking. And I kept on saying, "What were the kids for? What were the kids for?" And he said, "Did you see that movie Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You remember the adrenochrome scene?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, that's where they get it. They get it from underground bases." And I didn't really have all my memories yet, so it was almost like I kind of took it out on him. And it was this very, I don't know, it was very sad. It was that's all I could really say. And I was really angry with him that he was even involved with something like this. I was like, "Why are you talking?" And just knowing someone, and he says they know I won't do it. I guess he was like part of the positive side, is how he explained it. But it's like when you're in a world that's ruled by negative beings, you kind of have to work with the negative beings, the positive do, if they want to survive. And he would just say things like, "They'll hurt my daughter if I don't do it, if I don't help them with these things." But, he wouldn't partake in, there are certain things he wouldn't partake in. They knew he would. So, but he knew that these things existed. And I mean, what could he do? I mean, who's going to believe you?
Yeah, that's the issue, isn't it? It's so far out for the average person to comprehend that, designed that way, I believe. Do you have any understanding of maybe like currently where we're at with that? I mean, I know there's a lot of speculation and information around like, military ops rescuing the children, and that's kind of been going on the last 3 years during the whole COVID operation. Do you have any thoughts around that, or anything that was shared by Robert in terms of children being rehabilitated and maybe used in some of this ET tech to help rehabilitate them physically, mentally, emotionally?
Well, I was involved with some of the rescues when I was in the program.
Oh,
Solar Warden and stuff like that. Yeah, and with the Pleiadians, Nordics. I remember Robert calling them Taijitans, and I remember that, and things like that. But I remember, yeah, they would just have to get their minds wiped. These med bed, there's machines and things like that, med beds, where they can not only take out certain bad memories, but they can wipe your memory. And since they were young enough and they had the technology, they would basically have to start all over again, because nobody could really, you couldn't function with memories like that, an existence like that. So they would just have to completely wipe your mind completely, and you'd have to start from square one, learning how to, I mean, and these kids, they didn't know how to talk. He told me that, he said, when I told him I saw the girl hit the cage and things like that, he said, if she would have got out of the cage, she would have attacked you. He said they're feral. He said they've never been held or spoken to. He's like, they're just like feral animals almost. And yeah, and then he was telling me about the future of the timelines and things like that. He was telling me he was from the year 2580, and he had to go back in time and change the timelines. And I guess they have like Looking Glass and C-130 planes and things like that. He was telling me, where they could put it into the planes, and the bomb bay doors would open, and they would fly the C-130s over different parts of Earth, and they could see the future in that way on those different parts of Earth. So they could see new cities being built. They could see, you know, a new. He talked about things like the 1,000 years of peace that you hear, like the Q thing. He said that we were going to have 1,000 years of peace and beyond. But yeah, he said, I asked him if they're going to take out St. Maugen, you know, because I was really mad when with everything I saw with the children. I said, this, you know, this base should be burned down. This base should be blown up. And he said, we're working on it. He said, we're still working on it. And he said it eventually would not be JMF anymore. It would just become RAF. The JMF represents the U.S. Navy Joint Maritime Force. So the Navy would leave, and he said that's a good sign. So now it's just RAF. The base is just an RAF base, the Royal Air Force. But yeah, and he said, yeah, they were going to start sending, not, you know, mostly our military in there to start getting these bases cleaned. They were going to start doing, they were going to flood some others. And I remember I kept on saying, like, how horrible this base is, how nothing like this should exist. And he said, well, if you think this base is bad, you should see the catacombs of the Vatican, he said. And I said, what do you mean? He said, the catacombs of the Vatican is crawling with reptiles and grays and elongated skulls. And that's when he said, where do you think the world's gold's at? And I went to, like, I was just in London and stuff. I thought Bank of England, Bank of London, something like that. And he said, it's in the catacombs of the Vatican. And he said, it's just miles of it. He said it was they estimated it at a septillion in American dollars. It was like enough to make everybody on Earth 100 millionaire. And I said, well, is everybody going to be 100 millionaire? He said, no, nobody would work. He's like, you can't do it like that. Yeah. And yeah, and I remember I said, is it guarded? And he's like, kind of. He's like, it's just the basement door is guarded, like the hatch. He's like, but once you just go and get into the catacombs, it's just these open caves, and it's just miles and miles and miles of gold as far as you can see, like mountains of gold, mounds and mounds. But yeah, he told me about that, and yeah, and he was like really, he was almost crying in the sense he was so proud of his accomplishment. He said it's going to be so good. He's like, you know, he's like, it's going to be like the economy is going to be like the 50s but better. He's like, you're going to be able to pay off a brand new car in 6 months. You're going to be able to pay off a house in 3 or 4 years. You know, nobody's going to be hungry, and nobody's going to deal with that stuff anymore. Their birth defects are going to be a thing of the past. You know, people are going to live longer. And he told me a big reason why we don't really reach our true potential is because we're intentionally poisoned, whether it's through vaccines or our air, our food, our water. You know, they're constantly pumping things just in the air itself to cause your aging process to accelerate. So you can never really catch on, you know. We're almost like infants compared to ETs. ETs will live thousands of years, you know, but we don't even live, you know, 1 century. So we never really have it. And it's because the negative beings are afraid of us, of our true potential. They want to try to limit our life as much as possible. And they don't really want us to know exactly what we are. And yeah, and I remember he said like you'd start seeing things like, it would look like asteroids coming down with like little gold or silver sparks behind it. But he said that no, he said that would be their ships being shot down by Solar Warden and things like that, and other positive ETs. And he said they're trying to leave Earth. He said, but they know they can't. He's like, we have the entire Earth is on lockdown. Yeah, like all of Earth is on lockdown right now. Yeah. And he said, but they try to leave. And I said, well, why are they trying to leave if they know they're going to get shot down? He said they're scared. He said they're not rational. They're scared. So I mean, that kind of made me, even then, that kind of gave me some sort of feeling of comfort. When you think of a reptile or even a gray, they seem kind of, grays especially soulless. They really don't seem to have any kind of reaction, but they have this fear reaction. So, and that's a positive as far as I'm concerned. You know what I mean? Knowing that a reptile is afraid of us instead of us be afraid of them anymore. It's like the tables have turned. So, it's, you know, I see that as a good thing. That they're just doing very irrational things, and they know they're on a suicide mission, but there's no other way out, and they're going to try.
Wow. I'm just going to take a break for just a moment. We're going to come back. I have a series of questions that I'm ready to ask you. So stay tuned for part 2.